Hello everyone and welcome back to our class 12 economics series. In the previous two chapters we studied national income and money and banking. Now it's time to begin one of the most important chapters in macroeconomics, that is determination of income and employment. So this chapter is extremely important for your CBSE board examination because many conceptual questions and numericals are asked from it every year. So before we start, let me ask you a simple question. Imagine you own a clothing store. At the beginning of every month, you need to decide how many shirts you should manufacture or order. Would you order 100 shirts, 500 shirts, 5,000 shirts? You cannot make this decision randomly. You first think about how many customers are likely to buy your product, right? So if you expect high demand, you would order more. If you expect low demand, you will order less. The same idea applies to the entire economy. Companies decide how much to produce based on the demand they expect. If people buy more goods and services, firms increase production. When production increases, businesses needs more workers. Employment rises and people's income also increases. But if demand falls, the firms reduce their production, fewer workers are needed, employment falls, and income also declines. The simple relationship between demand, production, employment, and income is the foundation of this entire chapter. So in this chapter, we will learn what aggregate demand is, what aggregate supply is, how national income reaches equilibrium, why unemployment exists, what inflationary and deflationary gaps are, how the multiplier works, and finally we will solve important CBSE board numericals. By the end of the chapter, you will understand not just the definition but also how these concepts work in real economy. So let's begin with our first concept, what is aggregate demand. Now let's understand the first and one of the most important concepts of this chapter, aggregate demand, commonly known as AD. Let's first understand the meaning of the word aggregate. So aggregate means total. Demand means the desire to buy goods and services. So aggregate demand simply means the total demand for final goods and services in an economy during one accounting year at a given price level. Notice two important words in the definition, final goods and accounting year. We include only final goods to avoid double counting, and we measure demand over a specific period, usually 1 year. Now what does this total demand come from? It comes from four sectors of economy. The first is consumption. That is, households spend money on goods, clothes, education, healthcare, transport, entertainment. This is usually the largest component of aggregate demand. The second is investment. Businesses purchase machinery, build factories, buy equipments, and invest in technology. These expenditures increase production capacity. Third is government expenditure. The government spends money on roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, defense, and public services. The fourth one is net export, X minus M. That is export added to demand because foreigners buy our goods, and while imports are deducted because these are produced in another country. If you remember, this is very similar to expenditure method of calculating national income. So when we add all four components together, we get aggregate demand. The formula is AD is equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So you don't have to memorize it blindly. Understand what each parts represent. So whenever people, businesses, government, foreign countries demand Indian goods and services, aggregate demand increases. Now let's understand aggregate supply. If aggregate demand tells us how much people want to buy, aggregate supply tells us how much producers are willing to produce and sell. Think of a bakery again. The bakery owner estimates how much bread can be produced using available workers, machines, and raw materials. The production is the supply. When we talk about whole economy, we call it aggregate supply. According to income approach, whatever income household earn is either spent on consumption or saved. Therefore, aggregate supply is equals to consumption plus saving. That is, AS is equals to C plus S. Suppose a family earns 50,000 a month. They spend 40,000 and save 10,000. So then aggregate supply will be 40,000 plus 10,000 is equals to 50,000. This shows that total income is divided into consumption and savings. Remember this relationship carefully because it will be used later while finding equilibrium. Now students often confuse aggregate demand and aggregate supply. The easiest way to remember them is aggregate demand represents the buying side of the economy, whereas aggregate supply represents the producing side of the economy. Consumers, businesses, and government and foreign buyers create demand. Producers and firm create supply. So the economy remains in balance when the amount people want to buy is equal to amount producers want to sell. This condition is called equilibrium. So we'll study it in detail in the next part of the chapter. Now we come to one of the most important ideas in this chapter, equilibrium level of income. The word equilibrium means balance. Think about a seesaw in a park. When both sides have equal weight, the seesaw is balanced. Economics, we use the same idea. In economy, it's in equilibrium when aggregate demand equals to aggregate supply. You can see in the graph also. Imagine businesses have produced goods worth 1000 crore. At the same time, consumer businesses, government and foreigners together demand good worth 1000 crore. Everything produced is sold. So there are no unsold goods and no shortage of goods. This is called equilibrium level of income. Now imagine aggregate demand becomes greater than aggregate supply. People want to buy more than business have produced. So there will be shortages and prices may rise. On the other hand, if demand is less than aggregate supply, businesses will have to unsold stock. They will have unsold stock. This may reduce production, which can create employment and income. So the economy remains stable only when AD is equals to AS. In the coming videos, we will learn how the equilibrium is achieved using tables, graphs and numericals. Let's understand equilibrium with a simple bakery example. Suppose a bakery produces 500 loaves of bread every day. If customers buy exactly 500 loaves, everything is sold. If the bakery owner is happy because there is no wastage and no disappointed customers. This is called equilibrium. Now suppose the customer wants 700 loaves, but the bakery has produced only 500. So there is a shortage of 200 loaves. Some customer can go home without buying bread. This is similar to aggregate demand being greater than aggregate supply. You can see in the diagram also, when demand is more than supply, it creates a shortage in the market. Now let's take the opposite situation. The bakery produces 500 loaves, but customer buy only 300. So the remaining 200 loaves are unsold. So this is a surplus, similar to aggregate demand being less than aggregate supply. So this simple example helps us understand why economists want an economy to operate at this equilibrium. This flow chart shows how different parts of the economy are connected. When demand increases, businesses increase production. To produce more, they hire more workers. As employment increases, people start earning higher income. So higher income allows people to spend more on goods and services. That increases aggregate demand again. This creates continuous cycle of economic activity. So understanding this cycle is very essential because later topics such as multiplier are based on this. So before we end today's lesson, let's revise the key concepts. Aggregate demand is the total planned demand for final goods and services. Aggregate supply represents the total planned output. When aggregate demand equals to aggregate supply, the economy reaches equilibrium point. If you remember these three formulas, you have understood the foundation of the chapter. Now let's end with a quick quiz. Pause the video and try answering these 4 questions on your own. If you answer them confidently, you have understood today's lesson well. In the next video, we will study consumption function, saving function, APC, MPC, APS and MPS along with easy examples and numericals. Thank you for watching. If you found this lesson helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and share it with your classmates. See you in part 2. Till then, keep studying, keep learning. Bye bye.